Từ Việt Nam, chúng tôi đem đến cho các bạn góc nhìn sâu sắc về một trong những thị trường tài chính tiềm năng hấp dẫn nhất thế giới, mang đặc tính nhiều biến động của một thị trường đang phát triển. Thị trường tài chính Việt Nam có những cơ hội và rủi ro gì? Hãy cùng chúng tôi khám phá trong chương trình Việt Nam Street Insider. Thảo xin giới thiệu với quý vị ông Barani Krishnan, một cái nhân vật kỳ cựu của những cái hãng thông tấn quốc tế. Ông đã phụ trách mảng rủi ro chính trị tại hãng tin AFP trước khi chuyển sang Reuters. Tại đây thì ông đã đưa tin về thị trường hàng hóa trong vòng 21 năm và sau khi rời khỏi Reuters thì ông đã chuyển hướng sang quản lý chiến lược nội dung cho các công ty hàng đầu về cải tiến kỹ thuật số và tài chính. Before we discuss about the trend of commodities price in 2023, let's look at a very volatile year of commodities, especially energy. Do you think energy price soaring was the culprit to blame for the high inflation in 2022 or the opposite?
I think the seeds to the inflation were planted during the pandemic, from the mega billions or trillions of dollars of government spending and other relief that was meant to be pumped into the economy. I mean, what happened on the spending side was inevitable. To me, I don't think any policymaker had a blueprint to deal with this economic collapse that came out of the pandemic. This once in a lifetime incident, this virus. That said, of course, from all that pumping of funds that went into the economy, from there the inflation took a life of its own. Thereon, markets started pricing commodities higher and higher in anticipation of the demand that was going to come from all the reopening of the economies that were under lockdown and everything. Around the same time, you begin to have the supply chain disruptions that came out of those lockdowns, and the other curbs that were placed on the economy. Here's where oil started becoming a favorite speculative vehicle of the markets, because oil is such a dynamic commodity, right? It's virtually impossible for you to sustain without energy, and oil is such a huge component of energy, right? So what happened was the producers in OPEC were also eager to try and get the market back as quickly as possible to the pre-pandemic highs or the 2019 highs. So they already had in place an agreement that they brokered at the height of the price collapse when oil went down to as low as went to minus $40 a barrel for US crude at one point. That's how crazy the whole sell-off was. And then, of course, the Trump administration at that time tried to, help OPEC to get back on its feet. And the resultant of that was the huge production cut, which began by taking off like 10 million barrels per day from the market. So as the demand started actually recovering sometime towards the end of 2020 onwards, and then started to continue recovering through 2021, OPEC kept slashing production. They didn't stop. And oil prices kept climbing higher and higher through 2021, although they did not yet reach the highs that we saw in 22. So this was almost like a recipe for disaster, at least for the consumer, right? So it started adding heartily to inflation. So if you ask me, yes, soaring energy prices are to blame for the high inflation we have had, at least since late last year, through OPEC's continued production cuts. Of course, OPEC has its own reason why it's doing what it's doing. They're trying to protect their interests. But on the consumer side, if there was more oil that came onto the market, definitely prices would have been lower. So it's a kind of a push and pull, right? But yes, energy prices certainly contributed heftily to inflation, in my opinion, in this past 1 year at least. Although the seeds to the inflation itself were planted during the pandemic.
It's never obvious about the trend of any asset class. However, there is a fierce argument between the bulls and the bears in the commodities market. On one side, the bulls believe that the super cycle of commodities will continue in 2023 with the scarcities of raw materials from oil to natural gas and metals. On the other side, the bears want that the possibilities of a recession poses a threat to commodity price. So, what would be your long-term view over the commodities market in 2023, and which side, bull or bear, do you belong to, and why?
You left out something very important, and that's the weather in this part of the world, at least. Okay, I think one of the biggest deciders of commodity prices in the coming year, or at least in the early part of 2023, is going to be the weather. And whether in the northern hemisphere, you're going to get a very cold or mild winter, a very cold winter. And currently all indications are that we could have a polar vortex kind of a breakout. The last time we had a polar vortex, a real big one, was in 2014, 8 years ago. So the indications at the moment is we could have a polar vortex as early as the next week or 2 weeks from here, and that could really send prices of natural gas rallying from the end of December through early January. Weather forecasters are anticipating some 500 billion cubic feet of gas to be burnt for heating purposes, over the next 3 weeks. If you compare that 500 BCF or billion cubic feet that's been forecast for the next 3 weeks, the amount of consumption, with last week's 50 billion or 50 BCF, that's 10 times more over the next 3 weeks. That's one of the reasons why natural gas has persistently traded at between $5 and $6 per MMBTU, or million British thermal units, million metric British thermal units, MMBTU. So between $5 and $6 MMBTU, natural gas has been trading, and it has even reached $10, 10 MMBTU earlier this year, a few months ago, and on the perception that US storage of natural gas will be inadequate to keep up with the heating demand that we are going to have in the United States towards the year end for winter, And this pricing we're talking about at the moment has not yet even included Europe's energy needs yet, The understanding, at least so far, is we are supposed to meet part of the US is supposed to meet part of Europe's need for heating for LNG supply, right? So if we have a major rally in LNG here, then that could, have a spiral effect, to heating oil, which is a byproduct of oil. Of course, European gas prices are going to take their own life form because they always run ahead of the market, the US market and everything. So you could revisit the record highs of 2022, or maybe even set new records for 2023 in Europe, in terms of energy pricing. And that Europe has completely cut itself away to be independent from Russian supply. Could the super cycle in commodities resurface in 2023? That's a good question. I suppose it's possible if we have, but we need to have one thing, and that's that we need to have more supply side constraints alongside demand. And why I say supply side constraints, that's because we are not so sure about demand based on your question itself, because demand now could be hinged on whether there's going to be a recession. And if there's a full-blown recession that hits in Europe and eventually the US, then demand becomes more suspect, right? Of course, there's no proof as of now what the likelihood of that recession is. There are a lot of theories going around. Some people can't even agree on the definition of a recession, although the commonly accepted global norm is that 2 straight quarters of economic decline, is the textbook definition of a recession, but then again, there are lots of economists who have the different ways of calling a recession. But if there is a recession, we're going to need some hard numbers, and then those hard numbers have got to come from the EU first, in the European side, right? If truly a deep slowdown hits the West, it could have a trickle effect on the rest of the world. The central banks, from the Fed to ECB and BOE, are now all focused on fighting inflation. The consensus seems to be that the central banks will over tighten, before they, decide to loosen up. What we have seen so far last week, the so-called much awaited pivot, we're talking pivot. So finally, the much awaited pivot has happened. So we went from 75 BPS here to 50. And looks like we are in concert, almost beautifully syncing with with Europe, in terms of what the BOE wants to do and what the ECB wants to do, right? So at the moment, this looks like the norm, the 50 BPS. Big question is whether in February you get 25 for the Fed, but in the event, for any reasons, inflation remains sticky. We had the first meaningful drop in inflation, of course, from June's high of 9.1% on the annual rate on the CPI. We came down to 7.7 by October, and then from that 7.7, we came down another 0.6% in the latest reading. So now we are at 7.1. So you're talking about a 2% drop on the annual rate from June to November over a 5-month period. So you're talking about a steady decline of 0.4%. So if, let's just say, we go very conventionally and we keep applying that same rate of decline of 0.4% a month, again, common sense then tells us that by the end of next year, we could probably take another 4% off the headline inflation number. And if we do not raise rates any further and just keep them where they are, then perhaps the entire inflation pain that came out of the pandemic is more or less neutral at that point. It comes to almost near the Fed's target of 2% or maybe slightly higher than that. The question is, what happens between here and then? that projection, right? Along the way, what's going to happen to the economy? And if the economy, for any reason, seizes up, from all this rates, and there's some kind of a contraction on the demand side, then inflation will fall very much faster. And how quickly the central banks, try and adapt to that. To give the central banks credit, yes, I agree that they kind of slept at the wheel, especially the Fed. They took a while to react, and probably a little longer than what they should have. The argument was that there were still a lot of federal programs that were running on the pandemic, and they wanted all those things to expire before they started raising rates. But whatever it is, the situation got a little out of hand by the time they started raising rates. So we were really behind the curve. Now we seem to have caught up to some extent, but not enough. It's still a lot. Fed. Jerome Powell is completely right. I mean, it's totally right. We still have a long way to go on this game. At least another year. So in the meantime, if a recession hits, then commodity prices are certainly going to be impacted on the kind of like lower end rather than the higher end, right? So that's my thinking. Am I a bull or a bear? I'm actually a bear on energy and oil. It's a well-known thing in a lot of my writings, and I make no apologies of that, because at the end of the day, for me, the consumer is king, right? And for the consumer, high oil prices is a cost on the economy. High energy impacts everything we do in our lives, right from the coffee that we have. You go to Starbucks and the barista makes the coffee. They need energy to make the coffee, right? To filling up the tank in your car, everything, whatever you think of, you turn on the lights at home, everything you do that, it's energy. So when a commodity like oil keeps going higher, right? To me, there's only one industry that benefits from high oil prices, and that's the oil industry itself. And for every other industry, it's a cost. So for me, I've always maintained that this is one commodity which you cannot allow for it to go spiraling in the same way that you can do with, say, gold. You see, we consume, the average population of the world, global population, consumes gold kind of as a luxury product or as an investment. You can live without gold, but you cannot live without oil. So that's the reason why I'm always an advocate for lower oil prices. And a lot of the columns and pieces that I write, I get a lot of pushback from the readers. Why are you so bearish, and why are you this and that? You always find a way to make your columns sound bearish and all that. And I said I make no apologies for that, because I write from the concern for the economy, for the welfare of the economy, which we are all depending on, right? If the economy collapses, it's going to be pain for everybody, not just the poor guy, right? So for me, an organization like OPEC is totally in contrast with what the marketplace is all about. The marketplace is supposed to be a free market. It's not supposed to be a band of producers getting together to fix the price of a commodity and then try and slow down, artificially create a shortage in the commodity. I mean, they are looking out for the interests of the producers, no doubt. But at the end of the day, in a free market, ultimately, in a free market, everything will come to some kind of conformity. So it'll all sink at the end. So I think if you allow the market to just perform the way it's performing, and you raise supply on your own individually as necessary, then I think you have a proper functioning economy that works on its own merit, rather than a band of producers trying to get together to decide, what that commodity should be priced at. That's just me, But of course, you'll have a lot of people disagreeing and even venting and ranting at what I'm saying, But that's just me, right?
According to you, which commodities will have the best performance in the next year, and why?
So I think 2023 will be the year of the specialty metals like palladium, which is an auto catalyst, basically for the entire automobile industry, those gasoline powered cars and all that. Palladium, platinum as well, which is the catalytic converter for diesel powered engines. And then you have rhodium and other specialty metals. Very, very all these metals are structurally low in demand. I'm sorry, low in production, supply. Because of all the problems you have with the mines in Siberia and Russia, and because a lot of it comes from there. And with the war, there was like for a while there was like a complete squeeze on all these things, and I don't think it has really improved a lot. Now, what has happened is demand has fallen, automobile production has slowed. So that's one of the reasons why palladium prices haven't gone to a new record high lately and all that. But they can very, very, very easily hit new peaks. So the specialty metals are those that I think are well set to gain, like palladium, rhodium, platinum. And then, of course, base metals to a certain extent. But I think base metals will depend a lot on whether you have a recession. If you have a recession, then base metal prices are going to probably trend lower. And a recession will, of course, also pull down, because they're all industrial metals at the end of the day, even the specialty metals. And that's why industrial metals. So a recession will probably pull them down. Otherwise, I think the specialty metals are those that stand to gain like outperformance. Energy. Before I come to energy, I think one of the reasons why I'm also picking the specialty metals is because it goes back to that theory of supply inadequacy I told you earlier. That's one of the things you're going to need for price support in the coming year. Otherwise, if you have too much supply and you have demand that's down, then it's the market is going to collapse for all these things, right? Firstly, on the energy side is weather first, weather. Because I think Vladimir Putin is also very frustrated with the way the war is going on in Ukraine. He thought he was going to have a victory in 10 days or 2 weeks. February to now, it's already almost 10 months. You're approaching December 24th. Yeah, December 20th, eve of Christmas, will be the 10th month of the Ukraine invasion. I don't think he planned for that long a campaign. He thought maybe 10 days, but now it's 10 months. And nobody really knows whether a year from now this thing is going to be over. So, and he's also very frustrated with the way the West have all got together, ganged up against him, and the sanctions, the oil price cap, and all the things that are being placed on him. I think there's still a Ukraine premium of about 10 to 15%, about 15% in oil at the moment. The Ukraine premium. It was as high as 35% to 40% at one point. There's still a Ukraine premium of about 10 to 15%, at least in oil. So to me, a barrel of WTI, when it goes to about 65 or from 65 to 60, to me, that is the non-Ukraine premium price.
Thank you very much, Barani.
Quý vị có thể sử dụng bộ lọc cổ phiếu của Investing Pro để lọc theo chiến lược của các nhà đầu tư nổi tiếng. Đầu tiên, hãy thay đổi ngôn ngữ sử dụng thành tiếng Việt. Sau đó, ở trang chủ, hãy chọn sàng lọc để bắt đầu. Cách nhanh nhất để tạo một danh mục là sử dụng bộ lọc sẵn có của Investing Pro. Chọn thẻ chiến lược để lựa chọn bộ lọc cổ phiếu theo chiến lược của các nhà đầu tư nổi tiếng. Bạn cũng có thể tự tạo bộ lọc cổ phiếu với những tiêu chí của riêng bạn bằng cách nhấn vào nút sàng lọc mới ở góc phải màn hình. Sau đó, lựa chọn các tiêu chí mà bạn muốn rồi xem kết quả. Khi bạn đã hoàn thiện bộ lọc của mình, hãy nhấn nút lưu lại ở góc phải để giữ lại sử dụng trong tương lai. Đây là một hướng dẫn nhanh về cách sử dụng Investing Pro. Hãy thử trải nghiệm Investing Pro trong việc đầu tư của mình nhé!